So why do we need to maintain this caution? Actually, it is to judge whether the company's information system has reached a compliance requirement. There are three aspects to compliance. The first aspect can be understood as the legal part. As a company, it must abide by the law. The second part is what we call industry standards for different enterprises or different industries. Have we reached the security standards of the corresponding industry information system? The third aspect of compliance is some policies we talk about. Let's take an example, like whether the branch has met the requirements of the head office, for example, the world's top 500, right? It is possible that whether we in the Asia Pacific region meet the corresponding security policy requirements of the whole group. These three aspects are compliance requirements. Okay, let's look at the first part about laws and regulations. What about the compliance of laws and regulations? It is divided into two parts. One is this place that everyone needs to understand and pay attention to. It's the law of the jurisdiction we are in. This is very important. For example, if a foreign-funded enterprise needs to set up a factory in China or to do the corresponding information processing business, it must meet the corresponding laws and regulations of the Chinese government. That is, the laws and regulations of the jurisdiction. This is very important. There are also some general laws and regulations. Among these general laws and regulations, the most famous is the General Data Protection Regulation. We abbreviate it as GDPR. I believe if you have worked in European and American companies, you should know GDPR well. GDPR has a predecessor. If we go back, it actually went from the safe harbor provision to the later Privacy Shield to today's general GDPR. It is to solve the problem of handling personal information between the US and Europe, including some information assets when they flow across borders. It must abide by some basic principles. Here we share a bit. There are several main principles of GDPR. First of all, for GDPR, it protects the owner. We call it the rights and interests of the owner. So who owns the data? Then who has control over this data? For example, I can authorize someone to use it. This is the right of the owner, including how I store this data, whether I encrypt it, and when I revoke this data. These all belong to the rights of the owner. That is, I am the master of my data. You can understand it this way. So this is the first right. The second right, generally speaking, the area where the owner is located. It's storage. That is to say, we generally save data in the owner. This data is generated, or the owner, the jurisdiction it specifies. Here is a problem. For example, when my data in principle need to be stored in my country, but my country's computing power is not enough, what should I do? My data may need to be processed across borders. That is to say, I may take the data of European citizens to the United States for processing. Then the result, after processing, I return to Europe. Here is a problem involving cross-border data flow. Then the third, from the perspective of storage, it should be processed locally or processed in the area where the owner is located. We just mentioned here, if it is processed across borders, there is a requirement called desensitization. This makes sense too, because for example, data of European citizens, it may have some people's privacy, including phone numbers, including addresses, including personal income, including some people's hobbies. If I take this data to the United States for processing, I need to partially hide some data. Let's take a typical example. Everyone knows in daily information processing. For example, like announcing the winning number, it usually hides the middle 4 digits of the phone number. That is, the middle 4 digits are signals, or that kind of cross. We can't see it, can't see the whole, pay attention to the hidden part. Actually, it's what we call data desensitization. This data desensitization, there is another term called anonymization. It's about hiding some data. But this kind of hiding is irreversible because obviously, if I anonymize and desensitize your data locally, then I take it abroad. If it can be restored, then it loses the meaning of desensitization and anonymization. So, anonymization is irreversible. That is, after anonymization, it's what we call the signal or crossed out part. It cannot be restored. This is also very important in GDPR. Of course, there are many aspects to GDPR. We will just give a few important examples. But this GDPR also has some legal requirements. For example, the fourth part, if, for example, my American company is processing data in Europe, then this American company, like Twitter or Facebook, it may be threatened by its own security, or there is information leakage. In principle, within 72 hours must report to the European Data Protection Agency, like reporting to organizations such as the European Union. These are some requirements for reporting new leaks in particularly serious or particularly urgent situations. That time may be shortened to 24 hours. There will be a quantity requirement. For example, if hundreds of thousands of user data are leaked, the impact or severity is quite large, then it must be reported faster or at a higher speed to this European owner or this European Information Security Agency. These are the requirements of GDPR. In addition to these requirements, GDPR also has two exceptions. This is something everyone needs to understand. These two exceptions are interesting. The first one is judicial. If we are responsible for evidence collection due to judicial investigation, then it may break through GDPR when we are collecting evidence from a suspect or conducting a judicial investigation. It can break through GDPR when we get the evidence. Of course, it also has some basic respect for human rights, but it can break through the restrictions of GDPR. This is the first one. The second one is about what? About humanity, like the World Health Organization. It may conduct some human surveys, like during the epidemic. We come to count the development of the epidemic, including the number of people, including genes, including census. It may involve some privacy, in this universal sense, for the promotion or development of mankind. Some industries that contribute, it can ignore or break through some of GDPR, like the World Health Organization. We can ignore some requirements of GDPR because we are for the cause of all mankind or to promote the public welfare of all mankind. These are the two exceptions. In addition to this, including our company, including the government. When we collect data, we must also respect personal privacy. So, as we mentioned earlier, GDPR, it started as a general data protection regulation between the US and Europe. But as of today, you can consider it as general data. We can understand it as a regulation that everyone in the world follows, a regulation for personal privacy, or some requirements for data, or some legal regulations for safety. In this way, it becomes a universally applicable law. So, when we process especially the Fortune 500, doing international business or international commercial activities, basically follow the requirements of GDPR, obviously, whether it's legal or not, including some common internationally accepted laws. Basically, these are requirements we must meet in a universal sense. PCI DSS PCI, because people around the world adhere to this requirement. This is one aspect, and another aspect is specific to certain industries. The two main industries, let me share with you. One is PCI DSS. PCI is what we commonly refer to as payment card business, for example. Suppose we book tickets on Ctrip. When booking tickets on Ctrip might act as the payee. The acquirer acts as the payee. We can enter a credit card for settlement. You can try. For example, when booking tickets, we only need to enter the credit card number, including the expiration date, validity period, including what we call the CVV code, also known as PIN, the last 3 digits of the personal identification code, that is the CVV code. Only these 3 parts are needed. We can make a transfer. This is PCI called the payment card industry. So obviously its data must be protected. in the process of transmission, the data must be encrypted, because if your data is not encrypted, as we mentioned earlier, when I get the account number of a credit card user, including his expiration date, including his CVV code, I can pay on his behalf or I can pay with his account. So these are sensitive information. Then PCI DSS, it is for the payment card industry, or we say the card business in the financial industry. It will have some security protection requirements. That is, if you are going to settle with a credit card or do credit card business, whether you are the issuer or, as we say, doing this acquiring business, you must meet PCI DSS. If it does not meet this standard, that is, it is not on this list. Strictly speaking, has no right or no business, does not meet business requirements to do this business, then it may not be able to open. This is one. Another one is HIPAA. Then HIPAA, it is the American Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Now, many countries are also protecting some medical information we mentioned, such as medical records, such as doctors' prescriptions. Because for hospitals, including doctors, including nurses, including the hospital's DBA, that is what we say. The database administrator, it may cause a problem. I may have sold personal data to, for example, insurance companies, or I sold it to medical representatives. In that case, we may profit from this. That's not acceptable, because what we are selling is actually the patient's personal privacy. So, for doctors, nurses, including the hospital's information system, it has corresponding requirements. This is HIPAA. Up to now, it has become very universal. That is in the medical industry. We need to protect the personal privacy of the medical industry. We usually also look at some requirements of HIPAA. Sometimes Canada, it has a Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. For the management of electronic documents, it's called PCI. There are many laws and regulations. It may be proposed by a certain country or a certain organization, but after a long period of operation, it may become universal, or everyone refers to this law. To do a certain industry or a protective requirement for a certain operation, we need to learn this as well. We can consider it as a kind of line tag. Of course, saying this, it's a bit small, but we can understand it as targeting a certain industry. So it includes the requirements of laws and regulations, including industry standard requirements. These are all we need to comply with.